I knew things were about to implode when I saw Darren, Raymond's son, standing in my chair, arms out like some budget messiah, grinning at the walls of monitors lighting up around him. The new command center had that sterile, overfunded startup feel. Cold glass. Too much blue LED. It reeked of someone who wanted to be seen leading, not someone who had any damn idea how systems actually worked. I'd poured 12 years into the architecture behind those screens. He'd been on the job 12 days and already ordered security to escort me out like I was the one stealing time. "Give me the control server password and get off the property," he said. And that smug little wave he gave, like I was a pizza guy overstaying my welcome. I didn't flinch, didn't argue. I just reached into my jacket, pulled out the physical rack key, C7, and set it in his palm like a priest handing over a cursed relic. "You've got 2 hours," I said, looking him square in the eyes. "After that, this place turns into a $4 million light show with no power behind it." He laughed like I was joking. The kind of laugh a guy gives right before the floor caves in. "Before we go further, if you're already hooked, hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of you never do, and it's the best way to keep this kind of storytelling going." All right, back to the fire. Darren tucked the key into his pocket like he'd just been handed the goddamn nuclear codes. The 2 security guys, both younger than my oldest niece, hovered at my back like they expected me to detonate on the way out. I didn't give them the satisfaction. No outburst, no second glance. Just a calm walk past the frosted doors I designed. Past the wall I once begged procurement not to decorate with inspirational tech quotes. My boots made soft clicks on the tile. Nobody clapped. Nobody stopped me. My departure logged at exactly 0802. I made sure of it. That timestamp mattered more than anyone in that room realized. Because here's the thing about infrastructure, real infrastructure. It doesn't bend for egos. It doesn't care who inherited what title, who renamed which department, or whose daddy signed the checks. Infrastructure obeys logic, code, protocol, heartbeat. And that heartbeat was now quietly ticking toward full system death. A quiet, invisible clock counting down from 120 minutes. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because systems need protection from stupid, and stupid was currently giving a catered tour to investors upstairs while sipping mimosa from a branded thermos that still had the goddamn sticker on the bottom. Walking across the parking lot, I slipped my thumb drive into my pocket. Not because I needed to. Everything that mattered was already offline. Sealed. Secured. Dead man switch primed. This wasn't vengeance. This was insurance. I'd lived through 3 regime changes, 2 mergers, 1 hostile acquisition, and an arson investigation. You learn to keep receipts. Quiet ones, hidden behind layers of logic that look like performance redundancies but serve a much colder purpose. The last thing I saw before pulling out of the lot was Darren on the 2nd floor balcony, gesturing dramatically while a group of VCs nodded along like he was reinventing the concept of uptime. He didn't notice me. None of them did, which is perfect. Because in exactly 117 minutes, every one of those confidence-drenched assholes was about to learn what happens when you unplug the only person who knew where the backbone lived. And I didn't need to lift a finger. Just let the silence do its job. He walked in like he was the genius who birthed it all, mistaking blinking LEDs for intelligence, thinking if it looked like a spaceship, it must be ready to launch. Darren believed those high-def wall monitors and animated dashboards were the system. But that was just the showroom. The real architecture lived in quiet places, cron jobs with legacy permissions. Backup arrays physically segmented and nested 3 layers deep in cold storage. Custom watchdog timers nobody touched since 2017 because they never failed. Because I never let them fail. He didn't know where the real kill switches were. Hell, he didn't even know they existed. That's the problem with legacy kids. They inherit confidence, not comprehension. I'd watched the unraveling start slow. A new guy in procurement insisting we migrate identity to single sign-on. A Slack message about removing admin key rotation to streamline onboarding. A ticket from marketing, requesting root access just to test integrations with the CRM. When I pushed back, Darren sent a chirpy email. "Let's not get territorial. We're a team, not a gatekeeping committee." Right. Like having a root shell was just a fun party favor we were handing out to sales interns. So I started logging everything. Every login that didn't match a device ID, every policy revoked without change on log, every merge to the repo made outside of review hours. I built a folder on my offline drive and labeled it with a name only I understood. Failsafe stack. Not for revenge, for survival. Because I knew where this was going. I've seen companies rot from the head before. The son of the founder comes in with TED Talk energy and a subscription to Harvard Business Review, and suddenly everything that worked is old, and everything they don't understand is replaced with dashboards and buzzwords. They replaced our on-call rotation with AI-based anomaly detection. They replaced our tape backups with a SaaS vendor that had 5 nines uptime and 0 guarantees when the network went dark. They replaced trust in process with trust in Darren. They didn't know I still had shell access to the old telemetry node tucked behind layer 2 isolation. Or that I'd written a manual-only failsafe that required 2 keys, a biometric heartbeat check-in and a private passphrase, both of which lived in my hands only. I didn't do anything flashy. No sabotage, just quiet steps. I revoked my own access tokens, re-encrypted the fallback certs, and confirmed the heartbeat daemon was still in place. Still running. Still watching. Then, I pulled up a legacy policy file Darren's team had tried to delete but didn't understand was archived in cold storage. Policy. Failsafe re-engagement protocol. Manual-only status. Revoked by user Darren at 04:46 a.m. Log note. Legacy junk, cleaning up old files. No backup, no rollback. He didn't even leave a comment explaining what it did, just wiped it because it sounded obsolete. That's when I knew the clock wasn't just ticking, it had already started. Darren hadn't just yanked the safety net, he'd cut the rope and told everyone to enjoy the bungee jump. Phase 1 was quiet. Always is. First, I verified the daemon still registered my biometric from the day before. Check. Second, I disabled the passive alert that would have warned the current admin when the 120-minute validation failed. Removed the breadcrumb, left the trap. Third, I deleted my own profile from the staff directory. No photo, no title, nothing for the investors to Google. Then, just for me, I opened a text file and wrote a single line. Last authorized validation, daywax.02. Because when they came crawling, when the whole room dimmed and every screen turned into a reflection of their ignorance, that timestamp would matter. It would be the line between the system failed and you pushed out the only one who knew how to keep it alive. I didn't smile. I didn't sip tea and revel in the setup. I just sat back, calm, surgical, focused like I always was when the stakes got highest. I'd spent 12 years building a brain they couldn't see, and now they'd have to live inside it. Blind. The moment the security door sealed behind me, I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped 3 times on a dead app that looked like a recipe manager. It wasn't. The screen flickered. A single command prompt bloomed like an old friend. Failsafe.init zotoegh. Confirmation. Y authorization. Key. The cursor blinked once. Then, sequence armed. T-120 on Duaro. That was it. Nothing flashy. No alarms. Just an invisible guillotine hoisted into the air, waiting for gravity and arrogance to finish the job. Darren thought the rack key I handed over was some kind of master control. Like it would unlock the whole damn infrastructure with a twist and a grin. That's the thing with people like him. They expect a single point of entry. One big red button. They don't grasp distributed systems. They don't understand quorum logic, heartbeat monitors, or that the thing keeping their empire online is a cascading series of credentials that rely on touch. My touch, every 48 hours. No thumbprint, no continuity. And the last thumbprint had just walked out the door. I got in my car and didn't look back at the building. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. Too much. For too long. That place had once been my cathedral. And now? It was a sandcastle Darren was stomping through like a drunk toddler with a trust fund. Still, I wasn't angry. Not anymore. That kind of emotion is useful when you're younger, when you still believe if you just show them your value, they'll see you. But I'd shown them. Over and over. And Darren didn't see value. He saw legacy. And he hated anything that didn't come with his signature on the invoice, so I gave him what he asked for. The keys, the silence, the illusion of control. But what he didn't ask for, because he didn't even know it existed, was the heartbeat protocol. Something I'd written after the second merger when the last CTO tried to fire 3 sysadmins and almost tanked the entire core environment during a kernel update. It was simple. Every 48 hours, someone with the original quorum signature had to validate the system. Me, not a clone, not a copied credential. The daemon would check for my local thumbprint and a 256-bit phrase encrypted on a drive stored off-grid. If it didn't find them, it would begin a gentle cascade. Permissions revoked, failovers disabled, access logs dumped to cold storage, and then, silently, services would begin to shut down, not crash, expire. It was designed for peace, designed for slow collapse, like a cathedral closing its doors after the last monk died. As I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed once. A notification from an internal health monitor no one else knew about. Heartbeat confirmation. Missed. T-1 1945. Perfect. That heartbeat was my whisper in the machine, my way of telling it, I'm still here. And now I was gone. Which meant it would do what we agreed. Guard itself, not for me, for the system. I didn't need to watch it unfold. I knew exactly how each minute would tick forward. Slowly, invisibly, fatally. The servers would hum. The lights would blink. The dashboards would show green, but underneath, the blood would stop flowing. The caches would stop syncing. Logs would pile into places no one had mapped. Tokens would expire without renewals. And at 10:02, everything would collapse in unison, graceful, irreversible, and clean, just like it was designed to do. There's an internal doc buried deep in the infrastructure playbook. I wrote it years ago, and no one's touched it since. It's titled Heartbeat Protocol. Purpose: prevent hostile takeover triggered by silence. They thought silence meant compliance. They never stopped to ask what silence meant to the system. And now, the system was listening. The champagne flute in his hand made him look even more ridiculous. Who the hell drinks Prosecco in a server room? Darren had his sleeves rolled up like he'd coated the back end himself, standing there with his faux humility and that god-awful cologne that smelled like lemon pledge and delusion. He'd invited half the board, 3 VCs, and a handful of strategic partners to tour the new command center, complete with nameplates and a full catered breakfast from that overpriced Scandinavian cafe he loved to name drop. Smoked salmon and aioli quiches, in a damn knock. I nearly choked when I saw it posted on internal Slack. Today at 9 a.m. Command Center launch and innovation brunch. Innovation brunch. Jesus. He strutted them past the workstations like a museum docent. Redesigned from scratch, he kept saying, like the place hadn't run flawlessly under my architecture for the past decade. We've streamlined it, centralized all telemetry, fully cloud agnostic. Everything's proprietary now. Yeah, about that. See, 30 minutes before this little brunch and buzzwords affair started, I pulled one last thread, disabled the auto-failover script, quietly, cleanly. The code still sat there, but without the validation handshake from a very specific off-grid key, mine. It was just a dummy shell. No override, no switch. Just pretty lights and a GUI waiting for the end of time. As he smiled for group photos under the halo of a 96-inch status wall, I watched from a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sipping something bitter and watching their system logs on a screen they didn't even know still phoned home. One of the investors, gray hair, real eyes, squinted at a display and asked, "What's powering your redundancy?" Darren grinned like a game show host. Cloud agnostic stack, full auto failover, proprietary scripting, fully autonomous. The investor's eyes flicked back to the screen. At the very bottom, tiny font but visible, was a blinking yellow tag, validation pending. He asked, "That part, what does it mean?" Darren blinked. "Oh, that's just legacy syntax. We've got a patch for it coming." "No, you don't, sweetheart." Because that legacy syntax was the heartbeat monitor quietly reminding the system it hadn't been touched by someone with actual authority in nearly 36 hours. And in just under 60 more minutes, that same monitor would start pulling the thread on every running instance in the network. Quietly at first, gracefully, like it was giving them a chance to fix their mistake. They wouldn't. I watched another photo pop up on LinkedIn within minutes. Darren, flanked by 2 VCs holding a mug that said, "Uptime is the new black." The caption read, "Big day at the command center. Big thanks to everyone who made this redesign possible, especially the team that kept the legacy clutter out of the future. Legacy clutter. That's what I was now. Except I wasn't gone. I was embedded in protocols, in systems, in the rules that governed everything they touched but didn't understand. My fingerprints weren't on glass doors or whiteboard sketches. They were in the heartbeat of every kernel and daemon and DNS resolver they never bothered to document. And now, they were fading. Quietly, line by line. The system had entered what I called its blind hour. Everything still looked fine. Green lights, 100% uptime, DNS resolves, app traffic flowing, but nothing was syncing. Failovers were offline, caches weren't clearing, and the last backup ran exactly 26 hours ago. It wouldn't run again until someone entered a biometric match and passphrase into a node that now showed only a blinking cursor and a line that read, awaiting validation, 5603 remaining. Tick, tick, tick. At exactly 9:52 a.m., the heartbeat daemon pinged the vault 3 times. No key, no thumbprint, no override. It waited the programmed 6 seconds, then pinged again. Still nothing. The protocol was patient, but not forgiving. Somewhere behind the polished dashboards and brand new ergonomic chairs, the system started to shift. Not loudly, not with drama, just methodically, like it had been rehearsing this fall for years. The central logs began duplicating. Not to the cloud, that had been disconnected hours ago, but to cold storage volumes the current ops team didn't even have mapped. Secure, redundant, unreachable. As the mirrors filled, the active logs began wiping themselves in cascading blocks. Not deleting, recycling space, overwriting cleanly with zero fill. No trail left. No recovery utility could reverse it. Every access attempt was logged in the void. I watched it happen in real time from my terminal, curled up in a half-lit corner booth of a 24-hour diner just outside the city. I'd ordered pancakes I didn't touch, coffee I kept warm, and I watched. The command center's dashboard flickered once. Just once. A refresh anomaly, they'd probably think. But it wasn't. It was the visual echo of the lock loop initializing. It started as a delay in session responses. Then commands froze mid-execution. Users were silently logged out, then bounced back to command line prompts with no permissions. Then black screens. Then nothing. They thought the screens were the control layer, but they were just the mirrors. I'd shut off the source. At T-2 minutes, the entire network chirped in harmony. A brief, almost polite tone, 5 speakers, 1 message. System validation expired. Authority not recognized. Please contact system architect. I imagined the silence in the room after that. The tilt of heads. The quick, sharp inhale from the engineer too new to pretend it was fine. Darren standing in the center of it all, frozen, trying to signal confidence he didn't have. Because the punchline was brutal. He didn't even know who the system architect was. I hadn't used my name in any of the architecture files. Nothing they could trace with a search or a title. Every credit I left behind was embedded in shorthand. A single underscore. A timestamp. A pattern that looked like noise unless you'd spent the last decade living inside the bones of this infrastructure. I watched one more thing as the screen updated. A single log entry scrolling across my terminal before it, too, vanished into escrow. Failsafe protocol 112C engaged. Lack of validation. Hard reboot in progress. It didn't say who initiated it. It didn't have to. This wasn't vengeance. This was insurance. This was design. This was a living system, taught how to recognize absence as a threat and silence as an attack vector. Darren thought he'd taken control by kicking me out. But the truth was, the moment my heartbeat stopped syncing with the system had already begun preparing to forget him. Not because it hated him, because it didn't know him. At 10:02 a.m., sharp, it happened. Not a flicker, not a warning, just silence. Every screen in the command center blinked out simultaneously, like someone had sucked the electricity from the walls. The digital hum that usually filled the air, status pings, cooling fans, scrolling dashboards, vanished. One moment, they were live streaming uptime stats and useless heat maps to impress the venture guys. The next, it was a mausoleum of glowing keyboards and very pale faces. Darren didn't move for a beat. He stared at the screens like they were playing a joke on him. Then, predictably, he snapped. Reboot it, he barked. Hard reset. Flush the cache. I don't care. Just get the screens back. An engineer, one I didn't recognize, probably new, reached for his terminal and realized it was already dead. The central shell had dropped him to a blinking cursor 5 minutes ago. He hadn't said anything because he didn't want to look green in front of the execs. Try calling Tier 2, Darren said, jabbing a finger towards someone near the back. She picked up her desk phone. No tone. Tried her cell. No signal. Internal routing was already down. Someone suggested restoring him from backup. Darren jumped on it like it was the golden ticket. Good. Yes, do that. Pull last night's image. Which one? The engineer asked quietly. What do you mean, which one? There was no answer to that. Because Darren didn't know we ran 3 staggered rotations, 2 of which were decoys for internal security drills. Only one of them actually archived live transactional state, and it was encrypted using a rotating key stored in a physically secure rack in a subcage they didn't even have clearance for. Then the main display, the oversized LED wall that Darren used as his Instagram backdrop, lit up. Simple white text, nothing dramatic. Please enter validation credentials. Below it, smaller. Time expired. Full system offline. Data preserved in escrow. That word, escrow, hit the room like a brick through a stained glass window, because nobody knew where that was. Nobody even knew what that meant. Darren spun to his engineers. What the hell is escrow? Where is that data stored? Who has access? They all just stared. One guy mumbled something about old documentation. Another said he thought that part of the architecture had been deprecated. Darren turned red. Someone fix this. I want it fixed now. And that's when it happened. The one thing he never expected. They all looked at each other. Nobody moved. Nobody had the clearance. Nobody had the keys. Nobody even knew where the rack logs lived, let alone how to retrieve a validation credential that required biometric input and a board-signed override. Back in my apartment, I stood at the window, mug in hand. No gloating, no satisfaction, just stillness. A kind of calm that settles in after a storm you didn't cause, but absolutely saw coming. On the shelf behind me sat a sealed metal case. Inside, 2 drives, 3 access cards, 1 biometric token, and a printed copy of the escrow recovery protocol, signed by Raymond himself before he handed the company's infrastructure to his son, like it was a toy set with fresh batteries. The screen I was watching from home blinked once more. An internal notification, routed through a legacy admin relay no one else knew existed. Escrow access requires system architect validation. Board override required for reauthorization. And just like that, the illusion was dead. They finally called me. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt different. Not tense, not frantic. Still, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone's finally realized the grown-ups have left the building and the ones in charge don't actually know what they're doing. The security guy at the gate didn't stop me, didn't ask for a badge, just opened the gate with a small nod, eyes avoiding mine. I walked across the lot like I had 1,000 times before. But this time, I wasn't an employee. I wasn't the quiet infrastructure lead, forgotten in the org chart under legacy operations. I was a question with only one answer. The command center, which yesterday buzzed with performative energy and startup jargon, now felt like a funeral home after the mourners left. Every screen still dark, every desk abandoned. Half-eaten pastries congealed on a catering tray near the back wall, and standing dead center, hands in his pockets, was Raymond, the father, the founder, the man who once told me, over coffee and a crumpled network map, make it so that if something ever happens to me, the company survives. I did. Now, he stood in front of his son's pride and hubris, nodding toward the display, still showing the same stubborn prompt. Please enter validation credentials. He didn't speak right away, just looked around the room like it was some ancient relic he'd only just remembered he owned. Finally, he turned toward me. You built it, he said quietly. Can you fix it? I nodded once, but I didn't move. He waited a beat. Then he sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose like it physically hurt to say the next part. There's an escrow clause in your contract, he muttered. It says reactivation requires either your written approval or a full forensic rebuild of the system, which I'm told would take 6 months, minimum. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. Let it settle into his lungs. Let him feel what 6 months of full operational blackout really meant. Missed contracts, failed SLAs, regulatory scrutiny, and, above all, investor panic. He looked at me again. There wasn't anger in his eyes, not even disappointment, just recognition of a truth he'd ignored too long. The systems he'd once trusted me to build weren't designed for ego. They were designed for integrity, which meant you couldn't just toss out the architect and expect the house to stay standing. And now here we were. He cleared his throat, trying to find words that wouldn't taste like crow. Your contract, he said, also has something called what was it? Sovereign system clause? I nodded again. That clause, buried on page 17 of the addendum, had one purpose: to prevent emergency handover of critical infrastructure without formal board review and dual authorization. It was insurance against exactly what Darren had done. I signed that clause, Raymond said, almost to himself, 2 years ago. You did, I said. He exhaled. You said it was to protect us from outside threats. It was. His jaw clenched for half a second. I didn't think we'd be our own threat. I looked around the room, at the frozen machines, the panic still lingering in the stale air, the empty coffee cups abandoned mid-crisis. No one ever does, I said. He didn't argue, didn't defend Darren, didn't deflect. Just stood there and took it, like a man finally understanding the cost of letting a child play CEO with someone else's life's work. He gestured quietly toward the only working terminal left, one of the secure consoles tied to the validation flow. We're ready when you are. I didn't move. Not yet. Because before I typed a single line, I needed him to ask the one thing he hadn't yet, the only question that still mattered. I sat at the head of the long glass table, the same room where Darren once bragged about flattening silos and pushing legacy out of the way. Now the only thing flat in that room was his credibility. The board was already gathered when I walked in. No handshakes, no small talk. Just stiff suits, tight jaws, and the kind of silence that hovers right before a surrender. Raymond sat at the far end, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they hadn't slept. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I placed the metal case on the table, let it sit there like a relic from an era they'd tried to erase. Then I opened it. One by one, I laid out the contents: biometric token, dual auth key fob, master drive with escrow logs, and a printout of the failsafe stack structure, with a single sticky note attached: do not touch unless you understand what each line does, and you don't. Then I looked each board member in the eye, calm, clear, no performance, no threats, just terms. My position is reinstated, I said, reporting directly and exclusively to this board. No one objected. No member of the executive team, including the CEO, may override operational protocols without dual signature, one of which is mine. One director shifted in his seat. Another nodded, grim-faced. The Sun, I continued, letting the word hang like smoke, has 0 system privileges. Nothing. Not until he's trained, certified, and cleared by both security and legal. Still, no one spoke. Just the soft clink of someone setting down a water glass. Emergency key rotations now require in-person quorum. No more Slack approvals, no more 3 a.m. text authorizations. If you want redundancy, you show up. The lawyers scribbled notes. One of the board members finally looked at Raymond. He didn't blink. And the failsafe stack, I said finally, tapping the document with the sticky note, remains in place, untouched, immutable. You'll thank me for that one day. A long silence followed. Then Raymond leaned back in his chair and sighed. Agreed. No pride, no fight left, just a man accepting the cost of letting ego run unchecked. I nodded once, picked up the biometric token, slid it into the terminal they'd rolled in from the command center. The screen lit up, asking for reauthorization. Before I touched the keyboard, the board chair cleared his throat. One more thing, he said. I looked over. We'd like your signature to reauthorize the authority logs. He let that hang. Publicly. I raised an eyebrow. Press release? He nodded. You architected the system. You brought it back. Our investors will want to know who they can actually trust. I considered it, then nodded. I'll sign. And I will. Because this isn't about visibility, it's about accountability. And if my name's going on this, it'll remind the next wide-eyed inheritor what happens when you mistake inheritance for ownership. They thought I was a ghost in the machine. But now, I'm the firewall. And just as the room began to exhale, the side door opened. Darren walked in. Or, rather, was escorted in. Eyes hollow, lips pressed so tight they were white, and now it was his turn to listen. He looked smaller now. Darren sat across the table like someone still trying to convince himself this was a misunderstanding, not a reckoning. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the pulse in his temple. The reboot script sat open on the terminal between us, lines of raw logic and shell code flickering like a foreign language, which to him it might as well have been. The board chair looked at me. "Will you reauthorize operations?" I nodded once, but I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, I turned the monitor so it faced Darren, highlighted a single line, nothing exotic, just a basic override handshake with embedded variables, clean and efficient. "Read that out loud," I said. He blinked. "What?" "That line. Read it." He glanced down, lips twitching. "Sudo, double dash, init underscore." He trailed off, squinted, tried again. "Sudo dash dash reengage protocol underscore quorum something." He got maybe half of it right. I waited. He looked up, red-faced, embarrassed, angry, like this was some trick, not a mirror. I picked up the pen, signed, typed the key, pressed enter, and just like that, the system exhaled. The reboot countdown began to tick, up, not down. Terminals came back to life. Monitors blinked green. Subsystems pulsed online in clean, staggered waves like a brain waking from anesthesia. Everything I'd built was still there, just waiting for someone who actually knew how to breathe life into it again. I stood. Darren didn't. He sat there, staring at the system he thought he owned, the room he thought he commanded, the architecture he believed could be inherited like a watch or a boat or a cabin in the woods. But systems don't care about bloodlines, only logic. As I moved toward the door, I stopped beside him. Not to gloat, not to warn, just to mark the moment. "You still have 2 hours," I said, voice quiet. "Use them better next time." Then I walked out. Behind me, the lights flickered back on. The machines came alive. The Empire rebooted. But Darren? He would have to earn every permission from scratch. This time, no inheritance, no shortcut, no bluff, just syntax and silence.